how should I put this? I think it means to um, embrace who you are, who you know yourself to be, right? And to actually allow yourself to move into whatever variance that means, right? And for us, that means queerness and transness, but it also means all the parts of you that you were told were not okay, right? We're not appropriate, we're ugly or not approved, right? And so for me to be queer and trans is, yes, partly about identity and the way that I experience the world, right? But also about like figuring out how to love the parts of me that I was taught I couldn't. Yeah.
I think for me, queerness as a tool to kind of approach both the world around me and also the work that I do as a teacher is to think about not necessarily forms of identity that have been established in North America and Europe and then trying to impose that or translate it elsewhere, but as a way of thinking about the world, as a way that those of us who are, excluded have become killable. And my work, as you may know, as I've is on queer and trans refugee applicants in Turkey and the way that their lives become disposable. And that is how I'm looking at queerness, as the way that some lives become available for injury or death. And that is my relationship to the notion of queerness, not necessarily an identity.
I view it more from the perspective of just wanting to tell stories that reflect my own life and my own reality, and growing up not seeing those. And so, I know firsthand the experience of having to insert yourself into narratives that aren't yours, because growing up, I really had no narratives about Iranian people, queer people, and certainly not about Iranian queer people. I didn't actually realize when I wrote my first novel until an academic told me that it was the first, I suppose, English language novel with an Iranian gay man as a lead character.
As you're saying, it's already so hard for us to even carve out positive spaces for us as Iranians in America, right? Until let alone even move further down that into queer or trans, right? And so I just actually want to share a fan moment. I remember reaching graduate school and actually stumbling on Seema's work, and I just was obsessed, because that was the first time in my life that I'd ever seen anything at all that had stitched together queerness and Iranian-ness, right? And just like in my venue, nonetheless, in an academic setting. And it just changed my life, because that for me had become the first place that I could exist, right? That I was allowed to exist. And that's why I just think, what the others are doing on this panel is just really important, to even have this panel, to even, be here and say, we are here, we do exist, we are making things happen, we are writing our stories, we are, very much carving out our own spaces, feeling the social pressure from white peers, right? Even white queer peers who basically said, if your family doesn't, use the right pronouns, cut them off, right? If your family doesn't, come with you to Pride, then they shouldn't be worth any of your time, right? And so for me, it's actually a very interesting, fascinating cultural point where it's that's the same as telling an Iranian person to maybe cut off their leg, right? I'm not cutting off my family. That's my entire life. That's my entire network, right? So it's just, for me, probably thinking through how to create ways for us that are culturally sound to move through this notion of what queer and trans is, right? Because I believe, as I've done with my own family, that we can definitely, absolutely move through it and reach a place where it's a non-issue.
And I think my American friends had a lot of trouble digesting the fact that I could love my family and my culture and they could love me, and yet we could not come to terms on this one issue. It was like they couldn't compute that, because in their minds, it's like, well, if they don't accept you 100% as a queer person, then they can't really love you. And I'm like, no, actually they can. And I can love them and we can find common ground.
Just the fear that, this mass called whiteness or America or white people already hated my home country so much that I knew that if I came forward and said that I was queer, I just knew that they would have to swallow me up, and they would say, we'll save you, right? Those people over there will kill you. And it was such a powerful socialization that I believed it for quite a while, right? Like I was actually deathly afraid of that notion that like my family would maybe hurt me, or my family would cut me off for all these things. And I grieve that, because my family also taught me how to love, right? My family taught me deeply the ethics behind, Iranian hospitality. They taught me what love is. They showed me what love is for my whole life, right? And I didn't believe that they could love me through this. And I attribute that to the power of the way that the American trope around queerness in the Middle East goes, right? The notion was I just couldn't exist as all of these things at the same time.
Of course, for different people, it's different, right? For some people, coming out is very important. But I'm saying that, again, this is why it's important to have multiple stories, multiple ways of relating to our families and to the world that we need to put out there, that it doesn't become, again, a kind of a queer duty to come out. You're not queer enough if you don't come out, right? So there are many people who have relationships that may not fit the kind of normative way of queerness. There are people who may be married, heterosexually married, but have relationships with the so-called same sex, right? So it's there are many different ways, and it's okay, I think, rather than us trying to kind of normalizing queerness and saying that then you have to come out as X, Y, and Z in order to self-actualize. For those of us who are queer, queerness is not the only aspect of our lives. We are many other things. We are grandchildren, we are daughters, brothers, sisters. So I think those are the kind of forms of kinship that we need to sustain in order to survive the world as an immigrant, as an Iranian, as a Muslim in this country. So I think that kind of then makes it more complicated to think about when do you come out and how do you come out to your family.
And I think a lot of the shame that we feel around our own community being queer or trans, actually, with a more macro view, is because we've already been seen as so shameful by the white Western eye, right? So through that optic, to be queer or trans allows these more modern or sophisticated Americans to see us as even more backwards, right? As even more, disgusting or what have you, right? Whatever rhetoric they want to attach to it. So for me, I knew that the reason my mom or my family might say, I don't want you to be queer, I don't want you to be trans, what they were actually saying is, we've already suffered so much violence in this place. And if you actualize yourself as a trans person, you're going to invite so much more violence into your life.
So I think whether it's here in America, around the world, in Iran, what we should all be fighting for is a world where all of us have the options to live our life however we want, however open, however connected to our families. That's what true liberation would feel like for me.